Thank you.
There's actually a good James Bond story, isn't there, about the World Cup in '66, wasn't it? I was after the first game. You went to Pinewood Studios, and Alf Ramsey introduced you to a very, very famous actor, didn't he?
Yeah, this guy knows more about me. He's been such research more than my bloody wife does. Unbelievable. More research on me than anybody's ever done. I mean, I'm not paying the compliment for no reason. So anyway, we drew against Uruguay the first game. They parked the bus. I saw a clip of the film last night, funny enough, and you're not aware of the boos that we came off to in that first game. When you're in the crowd, I was on the subs bench, and so you're not aware how noisy it was, but the boos were quite loud last night. So Alf Ramsey very cleverly, because of that pressure we were under and the poor start, that he took us to Pinewood Studios to watch some of the filming. And they were filming a James Bond, one of the early Bond films. Yul Brynner was filming there, and a guy called George Seeger was filming a film, also not quite so well known. And I've got a picture at home with Bobby Moore, Jimmy Greaves, James Bond himself, Sean Connery, and Yul Brynner, which is quite nice of the album. And he allowed us, strangely enough, I was talking to my table here about this extreme discipline we were under, which was very, very favourable and fantastic during that period of time, all those games and those years. But he allowed, in this picture, the lads, this is just after Uruguay, we had a glass of wine each. And there was a little instance which was a Bobby Moore story. Before, we watched a couple of the clips from the acting, and then we were over watching them, and then from the room, they'd finished filming, in the room came Sean Connery over towards us. And Alf Ramsey looked and said, "Look, there's Sean Connery." And Moore had a drink by then, quick as a flash and quick-witted. He said, "Alf," he said, "now I've shorn everything." It was funny at the time. So that was a very clever way of relieving the pressure during the after that poor game, to take us completely away from it, and allowing the lads during the tournament, and that is highly unusual to have a glass of wine. Anyway, next.
The early days, when you left school, well, you left with a ringing endorsement, didn't you, from your headmaster, the head teacher, who actually quoted as saying, he said, whatever Geoffrey Hurst turns his hand to, Geoffrey Hurst will succeed at.
How the hell did you know that?
I knew the headmaster. No, I didn't. You quoted as one of your
yes, years ago. Yeah, I'd forgotten that. Yes, I had my headmaster or teacher was Mr. Billington, and I still hold the report. I wasn't, telling my tale, I wasn't too bad at school, so I wasn't necessarily going into the game. I wasn't purely focused on becoming a footballer, as we see young players today. I wasn't too bad, but I did have this quote from Mr. Billington saying, whatever I was 12, 13 then, whatever I felt I was going to do in life, he thought I'd be a success at. So he must have seen something in me in some respects. But I wasn't going to be necessarily a player. And a friend of my father, at school leaving age, we didn't go to clubs like you do to 8 and 9 years of age. I played for my district, my school, one game for Essex schoolboys, no coaches coming around, no scouts coming around anywhere near where I lived in Chelmsford in Essex. And a friend of my father's called Jock Redfern, unbeknownst to me at school leaving age, wrote to both West Ham and Arsenal for a trial. West Ham responded first and gave me an opportunity. They saw something in this, very green youngster, and gave me a crack.
Because you were pretty good at cricket as well. I mean, there was an awful lot going on with your talent in terms of with a cricket bat. I mean, you were playing as well in the summer after you signed the apprenticeship forms for the huge sum of, what was it, £4 a week?
Yes, about that. 7 quid a week.
£7 a week.
£20 signing on fee.
But what was one of the first gigs that you had to do when you get there? I mean, people won't realise this now, unless you were brought up in that particular era. But these guys, when you're not playing football, you were expected to do things like paint the stand.
Yes, one of my West Ham, of course, moved the stadium this year, which is a momentous time for the club. And they asked me about my memories, and some of my memories, apart from the playing side, was joining the ground staff. You weren't called apprentice professionally, you were ground staff. So some of the time you worked on the pitch, you rolled the pitch after the game, and during the summer you painted the ground and painted the stands. and that was quite normal. Clean the boots, as we all hear about, and that's changed dramatically. The amazing thing about the game, and I look back upon it with great amusement today, how times have changed, how different things are. But it was a great grounding, and I used to come home and saw my wife-to-be then, with more green paint in my head than anywhere else. So that was some of the really happy memories of the club.
You've done enough just about to make to buy that blue Ford Anglia as well, didn't you do?
You know that. Astonishing. That's my first sport. You know, how long we got? Cheers. What time the pub shut? My first car was a blue Ford Anglia, you know, the Harry Potter car with the rebirth. I went down Southend Arterial, bought it second hand off a guy just outside a pub for £460. Next.
The managers,
not funny, but that's the story.
The managers have played a significant part in your life. Obviously, we're talking about Ron Greenwood initially, and he was the one that was responsible, wasn't he, for moving you from playing as a right half into playing up front. And you're a bit nervous. I remember seeing this. You wrote this in your book about him calling you to your office after you had a particularly average game, and you thought it was, he wants me out.
Yes, a lot of people don't remember that. Getting back to cricket, which is the start of the story, I was playing, as we did in those days, cricket in the summer, football in the winter, which is crazy when you look back now. I mean, you finish playing cricket, as you know, in around September. You're missing pre-season, a month of the season, and the first 2 weeks of September anyway. And so struggling a bit getting fit for the season. It's ludicrous when you look back, not concentrating on it. I played in reserves, played in reserves around the end of September, beginning of October, against Shrewsbury. I came on a Monday morning, still not fit of course. Ron Greenwood got me to one side and said, I thought I was going to get a huge bollocking for the way I played against Shrewsbury reserves. And he just simply said, John Dick, the Scottish centre forward, moved to another London club, Brentford, I think. And he said, we're going to try you up front tonight. It was on a Monday night, we played Liverpool in a league game, and we won, I think a guy called Tony Scott scored the winner. That was my first game up front. And the thing I remember most of all about that was coming off, and my shorts were like they were dipped in water. Such a fat arse, not being fit. And it was like my shorts after the game were absolutely soaking. So obviously patently not fit. But from then, it's just messing around. I was between the two sports, just took off like lightning. And that year I played, that season, from that standing start, I played 27 games, scored 14 goals. And if you compare it with Rashford today, who's done much the same thing, although he's been an outstanding front player as a kid for ages, I was just a struggling midfield player. So that really, and from then, we'll get to it, just took off like a rocket.
And that was the first of the 248 in 499?
Correct.
248 goals in 499 games for West Ham.
Forget the England career for a moment. If I had to play for England, and I never dreamt I'd play for my country, that was something off my radar. I've looked back with great fondness of my career at the club, at West Ham, so I love them because they gave me a chance as a kid, as a green youngster. So I owe them so much to give me an opportunity to play at a top level. And I'm still the last player to score 6 goals in a game, in a league game, in Sunderland, 1968. Nobody scored 6 goals in a league game since then, although I think I palmed the first one in, but we'll forget about that. Thank you. I did open up. Maradona said it was a fucking hand of God. I did own up, boys. I owned up in the Geoff flat the first one in. I went home to my father, who was, I told my table, an ex-player anyway, that played with Oldham, Rochdale and Bristol Rovers, funny enough. And he gave me bollocking. He said, you idiot, he said, you've just scored 6 goals in the game, and now they're all on about the bloody handball. Why don't you keep your fucking mouth shut? And I'm still talking about the West Ham career, which I'm proud of, not only the total of goals, but I'm also the leading goal scorer in the Capital One Cup.
That's the League Cup.
That's the League Cup, the Little Orange Cup, now the Capital One Cup. I'm joint leading scorer all time with Ian Rush, Liverpool. 49 goals each, But I'm slightly better because I've played less games. So
and that was Rushie's last couple weren't for Liverpool either, were they?
I'm not sure.
No, he'd left and he was. He did.
You're right. He played for another club and got a couple, didn't he?
Yeah.
And equal mine. Yeah. So I'm just so proud of the club.
I think it was Newcastle.
Yeah.
So the first significant moment, obviously, the FA Cup final, wasn't it? The FA Cup final victory before moving on into the Cup Winners' Cup. European football wasn't really a feature, was it, of the British club landscape? Because only Tottenham had actually won a European trophy, but the first club to actually win a European trophy.
We were the second club. I mean, astonishing times for West Ham United. We were in the second division forever, and we got up. I joined the club in '57. We got up into the first division from the second in '58-9. And if you put that in context today, within 4 or 5 years, we win the FA Cup in '64. They win the Cup Winners' Cup, which is only the second time after Tottenham, quite rightly, that they won a European competition. And of course, European competition wasn't as big and expensive as we see today with the Champions League. So it was a fantastic time for the club. Not only at that kind of success we had quite early, but obviously 3 players that played for the club that went on to represent England in the final.
And all of this, and of course that began your relationship as well, didn't it, with pivotal moments in your career involving Germany or German clubs, because the Cup Winners' Cup final was against 1860 Munich, wasn't it?
Correct, against Munich 1860. Yes, my career is quite closely intertwined with Germany, because I played 5 times against Germany, which one nation is quite a lot in your career. My best game, of course. My worst game, which was my last game, in '72, and they knocked us out in the European Cup. In the first leg we played against Germany, we got beat 3-1, and Muller scored a couple. So that was my last game, my best game, my last game. My first game was against West Germany in '66 in February. My last game, I told you, my worst game was leading 2-0 in 1970 against Germany with 20 minutes to go, and the game was over. And Gordon Banks sadly went down with a tummy bug, and they scored 2 goals to equalise and beat us in extra time. So that was probably one of the worst games. I can't think I've ever played in a game at the time. Alf Ramsey thought so too. He took Bobby Charlton on resting him for the semi-final and got criticised for that change. But having played in the game, I felt as strongly as ever, and I still feel that today, that how we got beaten that game, is quite amazing. I saw Franny Lee, who played in the game also a month ago. I bumped into him in Spain, and he'd watched the film of that German game in '70. And we had about an hour together before I was doing something else, and we had a couple of drinks. And he said, "I watched that game 3 weeks ago, all of it through." He said, "I can't believe how we fucking got beat." It was that sort of amazing game. In those days, we had the Indian sign over the Germans. It's changed a lot more recently, of course, but at that time, we were a better team than them, and we probably should have won that game as well.
After you won those the 2 trophies, then you were looking at the World Cup in '66. It was a surprise phone call, wasn't it? You're out on the training pitch, Ron Greenwood comes out, and that's how they used to communicate. Somebody would give the club a ring and just say, "I'll tell him Bob's in the team, tell him to meet up with us," and then you roll on. It was February, wasn't it? February of '66. And you roll on down and meet Alf Ramsey for the first time at Paddington.
Yes, well, my first call-up, you're right about the train. We were training it was a poor winter. We were training West Ham in a roller skating rink, indoors, because the weather was pretty bad. And a 5-a-side in there, and he pulled me to one side and said, "You've been picked for the squad." The first squad I was picked in was in December '65. When we played Poland at Everton and won 1-0, and Bobby Moore broke his tooth and scored a goal. So I didn't play in that game. So he saw enough in me in the training and my behaviour and all that stuff that you're judged on, and he did pick me for the next game, which was against West Germany.
What did he say to you when they were looking for volunteers and you disappeared behind the line of players? And when he shrinked violence, was it pick you for what you could do?
Well, you've got to understand the transformation. As a player, 1 minute you're watching England play at internationals in the previous months or years, and the next minute you're sitting on a table with Bobby Charlton and Bobby Moore and Gordon Banks, you know, next week. So it's quite a transformation. So you're a little bit, I'm reasonably confident, but I think you're a little bit careful you don't overdo it. You're certainly not going to put yourself forward to be too forward when you know meet him with Alf Ramsey and all these huge players you watched on TV a few weeks ago. So there's some kind of reticence when you're asked to do something. You sort of did find myself pulling back a little bit, not wanting to overdo it. Just quite amazed I was there, really, to be honest with you.
So his picture, you got up to the end of the season, and pretty much you finished the playing season, and you're straight into preparation. You're away for 18 days, training, getting together, the squad get together. The level of discipline that was attached to the team then simply could never happen again now, could it?
It's much more difficult to manage the playing side of it today than it was in our time. We played in those years when that particularly was one of our strengths, the discipline, which was very strong. Funnily enough, when we trained, we stayed at Hendon Hall during this time. In fact, most of the years that Alf was in charge, this hotel in Hendon. And on one occasion, Jimmy, you were not allowed to bring your car to the hotel. You had to travel by bus, train, whatever, and put your expenses in, which is quite common. And Jimmy one day turned up at Hendon Hall with his car. And Alf simply said to him, you take the car back or you go home. And it was as simple as that. And if you didn't obey that, you were out. And many of the players recall one thing Alf used to say to them, when you left a training set or a match and after the game had finished during that period, and you left to go home after the game, you just simply say to him, and it happened to a lot of the players, they'll tell you the same story. You'd say something like, see you, Alf, and Alf would say, maybe, Geoff, maybe.
But he said that to you. Did he not say that to you after you came off after winning the World Cup, and you're leaving the changing rooms to go back to get ready for the
next season?
The season, and that was the last thing he said to you on that moment.
It was.
After you just scored the hat-trick, won the World Cup, and you said, "See you," and he said, "Maybe, Geoffrey,
maybe Geoffrey, call me Geoffrey." Yeah, it was that.
He had it in for you because of the lapel badges, though, didn't he? You were forever losing yours. They used to dress them in. You had the FA suits, didn't you? The big, and literally you had to go everywhere.
Absolutely true. We, the night of the World Cup final, we had these grey suits which we didn't like, didn't fit, and were too heavy. And the same story applies actually a few years later, when this is going back to when Alf first took over in '63-4. I heard the same story today, in fact, from George Cohen, who was there when Alf took over. And they were at a game in Brazil, very hot, wearing these heavy grey suits. And the senior players asked Bobby Charlton, obviously the senior player, God, if he'd see Alf and say, can we not wear these suits now? They're very heavy. And so Bobby Charlton, on the request of senior players, can we not wear these suits in Rio? It's very hot. And Alf said, and this is a normal reply, I'll think about it, Bobby, but we'll stay as we are. Bobby Charlton was once up, we used to train in '66 from the Hendon Hall Hotel, go to Roehampton training ground, the Bank of England training ground. It's about an hour in the coach. It's an hour in the coach training, an hour back. Long way, long slap in the coach for training. The senior players asked Bobby Charlton, would you speak to Alf and see if we don't have to go quite so far for training from the Hendon Hall to the Bank of England ground? Bobby Charlton again approached Alf, this is around my time now, and said, can we not travel as far in the coach? Alf Ramsey said, Bobby, I'll give you some consideration, but we'll stay as we are. Bobby Charlton then said to the players who asked him to do this, don't ever fucking ask me to speak to Alf Ramsey again about anything. He then retired from being the spokesman. That happened in '63. Just a quick Alf Ramsey story which I remember. Alf Ramsey, you know, was from East London, a Cockney boy, but had these elocution lessons. As you know, some people are familiar with this story. And when he took over in 1963, George Cohen, our right back who played in the final, was in the squad at the time. The first game was in France in a friendly. We got stuffed 5-2, I think, Alf Ramsey's first game. And after the game, and George was a bit closer to Alf Ramsey than a lot of the other players because he was there when Alf took over, so he a bit more familiar with him. And George tells the story. Alf said to him after the game, "George," he said, "do we always play like that?" And now George said, "No, Alf, we can play a bit better than that." And Alf Ramsey said, "Thank goodness," he said. "That's the best news I've heard all week."
But literally, when you turned up to check in for World Cup duty, I mean, the rules and regulations were no drink. No, I think you were at one night, weren't you, in that time? You were allowed to actually sit there and have a drink. And who was it that organised the escape committee?
It was Greavesy. Greavesy was a genius at playing, but he was a little he didn't like the discipline. He didn't like the discipline anyway, in any situation. He was very much a great player. But he went to Milan after the great Chelsea. 4 years he was there scoring the goals in the games. He went to Milan but didn't stay there for a season. He hated the very extreme discipline that Milan club had. Even on home games, you went to stay in hotels 2 days before the game, from a home game. So he hated that and didn't stay at Milan for, hardly a season. He came back to Spurs for 99,999 and played 360 games at Spurs and scored 260 goals. So Jimmy was just but he wasn't that. I think there was a bit of. I think Alf probably accepted him because he was a genius. I think anybody without his talent who didn't accept the discipline, and there were some, were removed from the squad. So he was left with a bunch of hard-nosed professional players, apart from some great players amongst that squad.
How did he ever find out that these things were happening? Because I think it was, I think you said it in your book, that the following morning, Alf Ramsey is downstairs and he's saying, "Just to let you know, I think I've heard that there's a potential of people thinking they were going to sneak out for a bit. Just to let you know, if you do, you don't come back."
Yes, well, Alf Ramsey, of course, as you know, played for England as a fullback. So as an ex-player, he knows what ex-players get up to, or can get up to. So he wasn't, having played the game at the top level, so he was aware of what players were likely to do before they even thought of it themselves. And yes, that one of the other, and that's correct, the other story that is very well known in the early years, on a Saturday when we played most Saturdays, this is before my time, they met in London on a Saturday, playing Portugal in a friendly on the Wednesday, flying out to Portugal. Saturday night, historically the lads have a drink on a Saturday night in London, where they met at the hotel, and 4 or 5 lads, and Alf says, "I'll you stay in the hotel, nobody goes out, big game," he'd just taken over, so the discipline had to be started to be set. And nobody goes, if you want a drink, I'll buy a drink in the hotel, nobody goes out. 4 or 5 players decided to go out in the town in London, and they got back next morning, their passports were on their beds, saying, and the note saying, "See me in my room in the next half hour." And he said to those 5 players, "If I'd have had 5 players at this short notice to be picked instead of you, you would not be playing for England." And when Alf said it, you knew he meant it. And so those kind of stories set the really strong pattern for the discipline over those coming years.
How much pressure did he put you under when, I mean, it was 1963, you just played against him, it was a Czech Republic, the Swiss, and East Germany, and it was the first set of decent results that he'd had. He'd had a bit of a difficult time at the start. He came out then 3 years before the World Cup just saying, "We're going to win that."
Quite a statement, really, isn't it? 3 years before the World Cup. But I think a lot of people said we did well and won it because we were playing at home, but a lot of people have forgotten that a year prior to the World Cup, about 11 or 12 games, we were unbeaten away from home. So he was starting to build a strong team and strong results, which is not surprising when you consider how well he did at Ipswich. And just to remind people, Alfred at Ipswich, a provincial club, in 5 years when he managed them, he won the 3rd division, the 2nd division, and the 1st division championship, and beat Spurs by a few points that year, with a bunch of not necessarily world-class players and 1 or 2 older players to win the league, which is an astonishing achievement. A bit like we've seen with Leicester this year, coming from nowhere to beat the top clubs. So you alwass knew that when he got the England job with that same method that he approached, being able to build a team and pick players that could play together. He had one great story with Jack Charlton. When Jack Charlton was first picked, he was nearly 30, which is quite old for a centre-half to be picked. And his first game, Jack, was against Scotland at Hampden Park. And Jack, being interested in coaching, became the Northern Ireland manager, Republic, and keen on coaching, and wanted to understand why he'd been picked for England at this late stage of his career. And he asked Alf, why are you picking me now? And Alf said, Jack, he said, I have this pattern of play, this method of play, which I've started at Ipswich, it's basically 4-4-2, and I simply select from the clubs and put them in those positions that can play with each other. And next thing he said, pissed Jack off, he said, Jack, he said, I don't always pick the best players. What he's saying is that he picked players that could play with each other. And certainly that very important central defensive partnership is key. The two lads that can play together, still key today. We don't have that left-sided central play today. Jack also, Mauro was the best player I played with, but Jack also was a very good organiser as well. And Mauro wasn't quite brilliant in the air, but Jack Charlton was fantastic in the air. Scored 100 league goals, for his 700 games. A lot of them with his head, so he was phenomenal in the air. So the balance, and also he played with Norman Hunter at Leeds, Jack, who played on the left side, similar to Bobby, like apart from trying to break people in half, he could play as well. But he didn't play much for England because Mauro was the #1 choice. But he'd seen Jack play with Norman, right side, and Norman left, and knew he would fit in with a left-sided player. And Norman used to like to go forward as well at Leeds and start playing from the back. And he watched that Jack never trusted Norman, that was always going to get forward and, without losing it. He'd always go across and cover, and told him a few things like that, and showing and illustrating how he felt he would fit in with Mauro and the team. So the balance of the side and the way he built his team was fantastic, both at Ipswich and of course with us.
And how he actually managed to blend the team as personalities. You didn't like cliques or anything like that. You changed room partners. You weren't in there with your friends. You got to know everybody. There's the great line back from Nobby Stiles, whose wife was pregnant, wasn't she? Expecting to give birth, and she phoned him up and said, "Are you coming home for the birth of your child?" To which he responded, "You've got to be joking. I can't leave here. If I leave here, I'm going to get back in the team."
Yeah. His wife was expecting Kay, bless her, and she was expecting that during the tournament or during the training, and said, "I'm expecting. Are you coming home?" He said, "You what, love? You what?" He said, "If I leave this squad," he said, "I won't get back in the bloody team." And he didn't go home. I mean, culturally, again, many things have changed now, and we see men when their wives are pregnant travelling all over the world back to their wives. And I'm not saying one is good or one is certainly different, whether one is better or not. But culturally, that has changed dramatically when men and sportsmen are there for the birth of their wives, and that's fantastic. But in our time, it wasn't culturally the same, and it certainly wasn't the same with Norbert Stiles, who Martin Peters' wife hadn't seen his wife for 6 or 8 weeks, and she moved house on her own during the 6 weeks. And while we're on about the wives, who, because our wives will remind us of these things, don't they, boys? If we make a mistake 50 years ago, they fucking remember every single thing. 52 years, me, and she remembers something I did when I met her. Our wives, the banquet after the World Cup final, Royal Garden Hotel, 4 semi-finalists, 500 people, all the dignitaries, all the FA. Our wives, who we'd not seen for most of those 6 to 8 weeks, were not invited to the banquet in a small ante-room. I mean, we see what happens today. They take their wives to Miami for a month, while the lads are playing in Brazil. So, time. But I look back at this with huge amusement, how culturally things have changed. And that was a classic example of how things were between the senior FA committee members and the way it was run.
Because these guys were responsible for picking the team. I remember there was the incident on the eve of the World Cup finals with Coca informing Alf that, look, Nobby Stiles, he's a loose cannon, we can't have him at any price.
Yeah.
And the response to that was?
Well, Nobby had we beat France in the last qualifying game where Jimmy Greaves damaged his shin and didn't play in the quarter-final. And there was a lot of call for Nobby. It was quite a nasty tackle on the French midfield player. And Alf got him to one side after the game and said, "Did you mean it?" And Nobby said, "No, I was generally trying to get the ball." And that was Alf's fine. And then he was under this pressure from Ted Croker and other members of the FA, wanting to say, we don't want think Novichard should play in the next game, the quarter-final. And Alf simply said, if he doesn't get picked, I'm off. One of the key things Alf demanded when he got the job, that he was in charge of team selection. Archaic as it may seem, prior to that, the England selection was taken by committee. So you had a committee of FA members who picked the England team. I mean, it's astonishing when you think about it. But when Alf got the job, he said, I'll take the job on the strict circumstances that I'm in charge of the team.
Alf's masterstroke, what he calls it, was his choice to give you 2 days off. At the end of the training session, prior to the World Cup beginning, you got a couple of days off to go home and then return and get down to business.
Yes, that was quite a good move as well. I think it is quite difficult, I think, when you're in a World Cup or a European Cup, as we're seeing at the moment, being away for a month, 5-6 weeks without family or friends, and the limited amount of training you're doing because you've done all your training, it is quite frankly boring. So it is, and some players find it quite difficult to deal with, doing nothing and want to do something. So there's a balance between keeping the players entertained to an extent without being silly and keeping the discipline. And one of the important things and key things for any squad of any country is the team spirit and the camaraderie that you have during that month or 5-6 weeks away from your family is a key factor in the success. We can see it now in the Euros themselves. Look at some of the teams that are getting results, maybe not necessarily as good as quality as other teams because their attitude is fantastic. I mean, look at the Republic's game the other night. That was absolutely fantastic. I mean, not quite as good as we've seen from other in terms of quality, but their attitude from the start of the game was nothing short of sensational. And it was very heartwarming to see a group of players play with that attitude and thoroughly deserved to win the game.
People often don't remember that you didn't actually play the first games. It wasn't until it was Argentina, wasn't it, when you actually came in for the now infamous game, and Cohen and Rattan and the shirts and everything else. We see some hard men in the game today. How does that compare, and how bad was that really on that day?
Well, I think when you look at the game generally in the league at that time compared with today, I look at some of the clips of our league football in the 60s and 70s. It is quite brutal. I mean, the rules have changed. You can't tackle from behind. We played these awful pitches, and there's some really tough, bordering on the violent. And that was the way the game was played. Fair enough. It's changed quite a lot now. That Argentina side, particularly, were brutal. We had the opportunity, obviously in the World Cup, to see the teams we were likely to play against.
They were the only team that had beaten you in the previous year, weren't they, Argentina?
I can't remember that, were they?
Yeah, I think it would be that you've been unbeaten against everybody apart from Argentina were the one team.
Oh right, I didn't realise that. Okay, I didn't. That was before I got involved.
Yeah. Before I was born.
So we'd seen the Argentina game was panned through to our hotel, and the game we watched in the earlier rounds was in when West Germany played against Argentina in their group. That was one of the Midlands, something at Villa, and we noticed the game, and quite frankly, seeing the game, it was particularly violent from Argentina. So we knew what to expect, and Alf Ramsey's main words, apart from looking at the strengths and weaknesses of their players and their team, one of the key things was the violence in which they played the game, and his key instructions were to everybody that week: do not get involved. You're expecting it. Don't be surprised when they're doing it. To you cannot get involved because it's always the retaliatory foul that gets sent off. And so we kept out of trouble. But there were one or two quite nasty. Pete Martin was knocked down, chopped in half twice by Rattin before he got sent off. And so it's particularly violent. Of course, result-wise, he got sent off himself.
Were the seeds sown then amongst the South Americans? Because there was a huge issue amongst the South American federations. Because what people also forget is that Germany playing Uruguay the same day, and the Uruguayans had 2 sent off, and that was an English referee as well. And so there was a big sort of thing like, hang on a minute, everybody in Europe, especially in England, hates the South Americans. Yeah. And it came back to bite them a bit in 1970, didn't it?
Yes, to an extent. I think there was that kind of feeling. Certainly was, but that's the way they particularly played. It was at an era when that particular team normally I would say you get one or two lads that can sort things out in any level. At the Argentina side, about 7 or 8 villains. I mean, the captain, the late Antonio Ratin, no, he's not dead, he just tackled that way. And talking about that game, Banksy tells a story which is perfectly true, but it never got out. And it didn't get out because in those days there wasn't the coverage of the game. Today, the coverage of the game is 1,000 times more. So many of the stories that happened in the game and incidents were not, they didn't get out. And after the game, and this is an absolutely true story, after the game, we were celebrating, being now in the semi-final, and a chair came through the glass door. The Argentinians had thrown a chair through our dressing room door, and 5 or 6 of them were outside wanting to fight us.
And Jackie Charlton said, let him in, didn't he?
No, Nobby Stiles was peering through Jack Charlton's legs saying, let the bastards in. But that was perfectly true and never got out. And Alf Ramsey had said to the players, back to that discipline, this story does not get out. And it didn't. It couldn't possibly happen today, an incident like that, getting out onto social media.
You hadn't conceded a goal either, which, again, people tended to, the focus is on the goals and who's scoring them, but the defence had a peerless tournament. It wasn't until Eusebio, was it, in the Portuguese game?
The penalty in the semi-final.
Yeah.
I think in terms of the development of the side during the tournament, or prior to that, the back 6 or 7 were fairly settled. Banks, the back 4, Nobby and Bobby Charlton in the middle of the park. But the front 3 changed quite enormously, to remind people, during the first 3 games. In fact, the first 3 games we played with 3 different wingers on the other sides. Terry Payne, Ian Callaghan, and John Kennelly, Burning winger. And then the other side, they played a midfield player. Bawley played a game, Martin Peters played a game in the first 3. And then at the quarter-final stage, they dispensed with the wingers completely, and we were called then the wingless wonders. And both Martin and Bawley played together as midfield players in the quarter-final. Particularly because Bawley on the right, because Bawley could also defend as well as attack, and they had a very good left-back attacking player called Marcelino, who we'd seen was very, very good attacking-wise. So he didn't want to play a winger against him who couldn't defend, so he played Bawley on that right side. And of course the quarter-final, we finished up nicking the goal after Ratting was sent off from quite a fulfilling move where Martin and I played at club level since
a West Ham goal.
A West Ham goal, reared on the training ground at Chapel Heath. The near post cross that Martin and I grew up as teenagers together, which we practiced time and time again, and to take that forward to scoring a goal against a tough Argentine defence was a very enjoyable moment for us. Banksy tells that story about the chair and the game, and he talks about the goal. He said it's the most delightful header he'd ever seen. He said, Banksy telling the story, very few goalkeepers in the world would have saved the header. He said, but I might have just got a hand to. So Banksy's telling her that story.
So you get into the final, it's the eve of the World Cup final. Nobody knows who's playing, but so Alf comes over to you individually and just said, keep it under your wrap, but you're in tomorrow, and but don't tell anybody.
Yes, we were told. Alf didn't generally have great big speeches all during that period. Of all the years there, his general management style was to talk to players individually about their responsibility, so you knew exactly where you stood and what you had to do. Not many, and that was much the same as he picked the team the night before. He told players individually that they were playing and not to tell anybody, although he told Martin he was playing, and of course Martin and I roomed together, being West Ham, and we couldn't wait to burst out and tell each other we were playing. Lovely story about Nobby Stiles. Nobby Stiles told phoned his dear wife Kay. In those days they didn't come to the game until the morning of the game. The Northern wives, Ray Wilson's wife Pat, Bobby Charlton's wife Norma, and Nobby's wife Kay didn't come to the game till the morning. So he phones her up the night before, Kay darling, I'm picked, I'm fantastic. So they had a chat. And he said, when you come to the game tomorrow, Kay, when you're clothed, try and wear something very patriotic to the same colours of the national team. And forgot, and moved on. So we move on 24 hours, we're now standing across the halfway line, we're here, the main stand's there, raw boxes there, not on the touchline close, but halfway line, and the Germans on the right side. And on the pretext of limbering up when you're in the line, they sort of pick out their wives or their loved ones in the crowd, or both. And he picked out Kay. The wives were sitting just alongside next to the raw box, and he picked her out. He gave her a sneaky little wave on the pretext of exercising. And to his consternation, she was waving back at the German captain, Uwe Seeler. Similar build, small, not much hair. He forgot to tell her, we were wearing red. He said to her after, when did you realise? She said, we were wearing red. She said, well, when the Germans equalised at 2-2 at normal time, she said, I was the only person in the stadium standing up cheering. That's Nobby. He's a great lad. And I grew up we played, Nobby and I go back away a bit, and we go back to under-17s, playing together, Alan Ball and Nobby under 23, so we spent a bit of time together over the years, and Nobby was a great character, And I think those two players who could win balls, imagine Bally and Nobby. Imagine playing 5-side against somebody, and every time the ball went near you, you get two Rottweilers nibbling at your heels. It's rather uncomfortable for 90 minutes.
Well, wasn't that how...
I'll just tell you one more story.
Yeah, go on.
While I was thinking about it. Alf got Nobby and Bally together during that period of time when they played together, and he sat them down and he said to Nobby and Bally, have you got a dog?
Yeah.
You heard this one?
Yeah.
Have you got a dog? And they looked a bit quizzically back at Alf and went, no, we haven't got a dog. So Alf said, what would you do if you had a dog? And they went, he said, well, would you exercise it? He said, yeah, of course we go walks with the dog and exercise it. He said, well, what else would you think about doing? And he said, you'd probably get a stick, wouldn't you? Get a stick and throw the stick and get the dog to chase after it and bring it back to your feet. And they went, yeah, oh yeah, we do that, Alf. He said, that's what I want you to do with Bobby Charlton. I'll get the fucking ball back and put it back at his feet.
So 2-2. It's going to go into extra time at 90 minutes. If you look back at the film, what you'll see is the German players, and this is very un-German, because you wouldn't expect it. They're all lying on the floor, looking at the sky, collapsed, run out of energy. Alf Ramsey's over to you and goes, get up, don't do that. Look at them over there, they're done, they're finished. You've won it once, go out and do it again. That was the message?
That was exactly the message, yes. Get up, don't let them see you're tired, and left us with those quite famous words which we all remember very clearly. When he said it at the time, you've beaten them once, go out and beat them again. And I think that was, funny enough, the Jimmy Greaves story reminded me of that. Could I tell this one?
Yeah.
So Banksy, Jimmy and I, 2 years ago, when the World Cup was held in Brazil, what they customarily do with FIFA, they take the World Cup round all the countries that are playing in the tournament. So it was arranged for the World Cup to turn up at Wembley on a breakfast morning to entertain about 200 or 300 of the Wembley box holders. The World Cup trophy was there. They have a picture with us, a picture of the World Cup. We would do 45 minutes, 3 of us, and the interview was Jim Rosenthal. That was the structure. So we get there fairly early, but in the internal FA TV program wanted to interview Banksy, Jimmy, myself in the stand before we did the show. So they asked us 4 or 5 questions, and one of the questions was, I was here, Banksy here, and Jimmy at the end. First question was, one of the questions, what's the most important piece of information you've received from an England manager at half-time? And I said, well, for me, it wasn't necessarily at half-time, but the most important piece of information I've received was that what you've just said. When the Germans equalised, you've beaten them once, go and beat them again. I asked Banksy the same question. I can't remember what Banksy said, but they got to Jimmy. So Jimmy, what's the most important piece of information you received from an England manager at half-time? And Jimmy looked up and said, well, when Alf first took over, after a few games, he came in at half-time. I think we were playing Scotland at home. He came in and said, Jimmy, put your fag out. This is on the FA internal TV. I'm starting to laugh. We've done the interview. We now go in this small ante-room, prior to still going out and doing entertaining box holders. We're now in a small room, an ante-room, which is apparently where the Queen goes when she goes to the matches. And in the room there's me, Banksy, Jim Rosenthal, a couple of the FA staff are serving the bacon sandwiches, and it's quite a small room, teas and coffees. And then comes 3 or 4 guys from FIFA with the World Cup. The World Cup itself is in a holder that we take on an aeroplane, that kind of size. The guy holding it, so we asked them a few questions. Where do you go? All over the world, where they're playing. How long do you stay? Depends on the size of the country, could be a day. In England it's going to be about 3 days. Then I engaged the guy who's holding the suitcase with the World Cup in it. And he had the white gloves on. As some of you know, when you hold very important memorabilia, you have to they put the gloves on, these museums you go to. And this guy had the white gloves holding the suitcase. But I was interested to find out why, with the World Cup in the suitcase, he was wearing white gloves. And he said, well, to be honest with you, you keep taking them on, putting them off, open the bag, taking them on, putting them off. It's a bit of a pain in the arse. That's not be said, but something like that. He said, but then he said something quite interesting after that conversation. He said, what is true, and this apparently is true, you can only hold the World Cup trophy if you have played in the World Cup and won the World Cup. So Jimmy's listening intensely to this. And Jimmy said, this poses a very important question. If the World Cup gets nicked, there's only our fucking fingerprints on it. I'm now, this is twice now, in about half an hour. We've not even started yet, and I'm now crying. I mean, Jimmy's a brilliant player, a very funny man. Some of you have seen him, and some have seen him live. He's a very funny man, and doesn't really give a shit, quite frankly.
So you go off, you have your banquet, and what is more remarkable about this particular weekend? So you've done the banquet, and then you get, I think you have a lunch with Eamon Andrews, don't you, down at the TV centre?
Yes.
And then the world star, the global superstar that you are, you have won the World Cup, you are now probably one of the most instantly recognisable people anywhere across the UK. You go and wash the car and cut the grass.
Yes.
On a Sunday afternoon. 24 hours earlier, he's scoring a hat-trick. 24 hours later, he's out with a lawnmower and a tin of triple.
People don't believe that. That's absolutely true. Yeah. I think we was asked on the table, how much did you, become famous and all and enjoy everything? But the way the game was played on the 30th of July, so you're almost a week or two away from starting the new season.
You were back a week later, really?
Back a week later, another week's training, and we played Chelsea. Martin, Bobby and I paraded the World Cup round the stadium at Upton Park. The first game against Chelsea, before the first game against Chelsea, we lose 2-1, so we're back to reality quite quickly. So there was very little time to. It certainly didn't happen. I don't think you're really aware, and I say this quite often, aware of the magnitude of the occasion when you're in the bubble for the 6 or 8 weeks. You're not aware of what's going on around the country, the empty streets and people watching TVs in the road, looking at radio rentals, TV shops, where you rent them in a row, or there's one guy in the street's got a 14-inch black and white TV and everybody's down there. Weddings being spoiled because the husbands want to go in a small room and not dance with their wives at weddings, and so on and so on. And the great thing about that, the enjoyment of winning a World Cup, when you hear these stories, just lasts forever. That you're not aware at the time, but the enjoyment goes on.
Did you think when you walked off that field and life got back to normal, did you think then that 50 years later we'd be still sat here and you would still be the World Cup hat-trick winning superhero from the one and only England team that won the World Cup?
No, not at all. Again, I wasn't aware of the occasion. I think no, not for a second. I think probably if you go back in time, we hadn't really competed in many World Cups. The early ones, 30, 34, I think we didn't compete. We played in 1950, got knocked out by the USA, 1-0. So the World Cup. Clubs didn't play in Europe much. It wasn't Man United that were the standard bearers playing actually football in Europe, when our league, our officials in this country didn't want us to play in Europe, not for it. So we get to the World Cup in our country and win it, a fantastic occasion and everything that surrounds that. I think many people thought, we quite like this World Cup, we'll do it again. But of course we realised 50 odd years later, it's not quite as easy. We were close, I think we were quite close in 90 in fairness. In 96 in the Euro, we had a bloody good side there with Shearer and Sheringham up front and Tony Adams, Stuart Pearce, Gazza in the middle of the park. Very, very good team. I think had it's only a couple of penalties either way, we easily could have gone on and won it. It was that close on both those occasions. And I think had we sort of been successful, one of those or both, we would not be talking in this kind of mood. But we haven't won it, and so there's that kind of thing. And the hat-trick itself wasn't important at the time. The important thing far is the winning of the game. Hat-trick was irrelevant. It's not who scores the goals, it's winning the game. But as time's gone on and it's becoming more difficult to score 3, there's not so many goals being scored, penalties of winning World Cup finals. So it is quite becoming quite difficult.
You experienced both sides of the coin in terms of the emotion and expectation. From '66, where maybe people weren't thinking you were going to win, to 1970, which is, doesn't matter, we'll go over there and win. It's only not going to be a problem. Mexico, nobody had any idea about altitude or what playing at altitude meant or anything like that. I mean, you say you lost a stone in that game against Germany?
It was the very difficult conditions, of course. I mean, we played Brazil, and Banksy reminded me the other day the temperature at noon, when we played at noon, so there's no shadow out there, the shadow is down under your feet. It was 103 degrees. We're based in Guadalajara, that was 5,000 feet above sea level. And for those 6 or 7 years, England were the team to beat. And in 70, we felt we had as good a chance, if not a better chance, of retaining the trophy. And we came up against Brazil, who arguably one of the best sides, Brazilian sides ever won a World Cup. We lost 1-0 in an early round. Banksy made that great save, of course.
What was it that Bobby Moore said to Banksy after he made that save? Everybody will remember that save from Pele's header when he went down. What was it Bobby Moore said? This is what made him smile, isn't it?
After he made this unbelievable save, and then as Banksy wasn't sure that the goal had gone in, at the top of his fingers, it bounced down and up, and he had to judge how far it's going to bounce up. Made this unbelievable save, but as it was going over his hands, Banksy describes it, he thought it had gone in, but he looked over, once he finished his fall, looked over, saw the ball finish behind the net, and Banksy said to himself, "You lucky twat." And Mora came up to him and said, "Banksy, can't you keep a hold of him?"
Getting on a bit.
So the conditions were quite difficult. We lost 1-0 against Brazil, the great Brazilian side, and we were the team to beat. Germany were leading 2-0, 20 minutes to go, and finished up losing in extra time. And so that was one of the real downsides. But we
changed in time for you as well in your career, because you were moving towards the you signed that 6-year agreement with West Ham. You're moving towards the end of that. The appearances becoming a little less. Was there what was going through your mind at that stage of your career? Because we then, after 72, we didn't qualify in 74, 76, 78.
Well, it was the end of an era, a very good era for the team, and a change of manager and change of players. So yes, we didn't qualify, which is a blow. We were very close to the Poland game, qualifying in 74. Unluckily, really, just the odd game or goal can go against you. But I just going back to a lovely story about based in Guadalajara in Mexico for 1970. So the conditions I mentioned were very hot. We were playing at noon, so we were training at noon in the early games, for the early games. And we'd heard during our training in that first acclimatization fortnight that the Duke of Edinburgh was playing polo against the Mexicans. And he'd indicated he wanted to come and visit the players immediately after training. And to rehearse that, he sent his an assistant, I think they call him an equerry or an equerry, I don't understand the word, but he's his assistant that sorts this out. He turned up at the training ground the day before the Duke was due to arrive, to run through the behaviour and what we'd expect. He turned up about 1 o'clock, 1:15, just after we finished our session, and the lads started to disappear in the changing room to get changed. And he said, no, he said, once the Duke's here, you don't disappear, you line up, as you will now, line up, the 22 of you in front of the changing room. And then he said, I'll just walk through a few of you now and just tell you the kind of questions you might get from the Duke tomorrow. So he went through the team and chatted to one, missed a couple of minutes, chatted to one. He got to the end, one standing up and slumped over a chair in a state of huge distress was the West Bromwich Albion centre forward. Remember a guy called Geoff, a nutcase. So he gets to Geoff, and Geoff said, so he said to Geoff, why are you slumped over a chair? Why are you tired? And Geoff looked up and said, I'm knackered. He said, well, what's the problem? Was it, Geoff, we've only been here for about 7 or 8 days. We're still acclimatising. It's 100 odd degrees in the shade. It's 5,000 feet here in Guadalajara. So I'm finding it very difficult to maintain this fitness. And the equerry said, well, I can't understand it, my man. He said, the Duke of Edinburgh's been here for about 7 to 10 days. He's had 4 or 5 games against the Mexicans playing polo, and he's not really recorded or reported any physical problems. And Geoff looked up and said, have you asked about his fucking horse fields? On the line, all the lads lined up, I mean, tittering and laughing and seeing Geoff talk, I mean...
Was that after you'd had your session of the synchronised sunbathing?
Oh yes, yeah.
We
sunbathed to a whistle. The lads, it was hot, they wanted to sunbathe, strict discipline. Harold Shepson had a whistle. A minute on your front, a minute on your back, and a minute in the pool. To the whistle. Believe it or not, unbelievable. Amazing. To the whistle. Sunbathing to a whistle. And there's lots of other stories like that of the discipline at the time, and I've touched on a few today. Well, that was the kind of discipline we were under, probably, which was beneficial and fantastic, of course. It's much more difficult to do that today. Alan Moore once said, much more later when he was a manager, with the new wage structure we see, how do you give a bollocking to a millionaire? So it's much more difficult to do it in the times that we played it.
People would have thought that at the end of your playing career, as indeed is the case today, where pros retire, I'm thinking somebody like Ryan Giggs, who's been hanging around waiting for the call to go upstairs and manage Manchester United. You went off to non-league, you went off to Telford before you ended up going to Chelsea after Danny Blanchard. Why did you not stay in it longer than you did, for one, and why were there not more offers?
Well, talking about offers, strangely enough, when I was keen on coaching, Ron Greenwood, who was a brilliant coach, and he encouraged us to become coaches and stay in the game, and we took our first badge, which is the preliminary coaching badge, at Lillishall. Took the West Ham senior players, Bobby Moore, Martin Peters, myself and the rest of the team, to take our prelim badge. Very keen on getting the lads into coaching because he was such a brilliant coach himself. So that was quite in itself unusual. But when I saw I was keen, and you automatically almost, apart from doing the badges, which I did, still you sort of go into the game as a coach, sort of fall into it to an extent, which is really what I did. But when I finished playing at West Brom, I always decided to try and finish at the top. I had 2 offers to become a coach, to involve with the management and coaching. One was to be the manager of Telford United in the Midlands, and the other one was to be the coach at Crewe Alexander. They were the 2 offers I had. I then decided that I saw myself more as managing a club as opposed to just coaching on the field. Saw myself more in that kind of mould, and decided to take the Telford United club. I stayed at Telford for 3 years, and we did quite well the 3rd year, finished in the top 3 or 4, and that was noticed even by Chelsea Football Club. And Danny Blanchflower was the manager there, and they invited me to be the number 2 at Chelsea under Danny Blanchflower. That was in summer of '79. So I then went there, which is a fantastic club and a fantastic opportunity for me. In the 2nd division Chelsea there, the club was in debt, in serious trouble.
You nearly pulled off the coup of the century there, didn't you?
We did. We were very close the first year everything was wrong at the club. The youth side wasn't doing particularly well.
I was thinking of you signing Kevin Keegan.
Oh, almost. Yes, went to see Kevin Keegan to sign him, but he went to Southampton, so we were quite close to signing him.
You got Colin Lee instead.
Colin Lee, who didn't quite work out as well. So that was a bit of a blow, really. But we nearly got up, and then 2nd year I got the sack in '81, April 23rd. 12 o'clock. And again, the difference in the game I found quite quickly after getting the sack at Chelsea, doing some punditry in the Anglia region at Cambridge, Norwich, Peterborough, Ipswich, Norwich, and doing a few other personal appearances, I found that quite quick I could earn almost as good a living, as good a money as I managed at Chelsea. I was on 28 grand at Chelsea. My first year out of football, messing around as I put it, I got to earn about 24 grand. So when I sort of discovered after that first year I could earn as good a living out of the game, rather than taking my three daughters from club to club and being sacked every 2 or 3 years, which was, and without being paid in those days you didn't, if you had to fight for it, I decided coldly that I was going to go into business and stay out of football.
But this was some remarkable change. I mean, anybody who's ever worked in sales in here knows what the misery of doing a job which involves cold calling is. And you walked away from the football, you had your time in Kuwait, and then you come back and think, I said, I'll go and sell insurance.
Yes, I made my mind up I was going to leave the game, but Kuwait came in the middle of that because there was very good money, so it was hard to turn down. So I decided to go there with the family for a couple of years. But the job I was involved in, I touched on before I left in the warranty insurance business, but they said would hold the position for me in the business if I came back after 2 years, which I did. And then I went on the streets knocking on doors, car dealerships all over the country with the local
What was it like then when people, somebody's opening a door, you've got Mr. and Mrs. Smith at number 38, and they're opening the door and they've got Geoff Hurst out there. There was an occasion, wasn't there, where the wife goes and says...
I must have done some studying for 6 months prior to listening to you. Well, 2 stories relating to that which come to mind. In the early days of learning about the insurance business, you go through a course learning, the elements of selling, which was quite a good induction course. And one of the things you had to do was pick up a directory and phone ad lib a number of people and try and talk to them and get through to them. So on one occasion, in one of my sessions, I found a few people, got through to this woman one day and said, hello, give her the spiel, who I'm, my name and the company I work for, I'd like to talk to you about insurance, whatever the lines were. And I said, my name's Geoff Hurst. And so the woman went, said, I'll get my husband. And husband came on, I said, yes, well, so, my name's Geoff Hurst, I want to talk to you about insurance. And he said, if your name's Geoff Hurst, my name's fucking Marilyn Monroe. The second one just comes to mind. In the early days, although I wanted to commit myself to the job and I had to bring the same sort of qualities to the business I did in football, dedication and timekeeping and all that sort of stuff. And I went to a Ford dealership in Essex. And sometimes you make an appointment, sometimes you don't. If you're in an area, you just take a chance and walk in and try and see the MD or the sales director. And I went in and went to the desk of his secretary. The boss was in the glass doors in his office. And I gave him my card. I said, Mr. Geoff Hurst, I'm from Motorplan, I'd like to talk to you about car warranties. And she took the card, went into the office. They were chatting for some time and looking at the card. I could see through the glass. And I'm sat there with the local rep at this table. And he walked out from his office. I'm sat there. He walked past me and threw his card back at me, across the desk, and said, I don't deal with ex-footballers. And went back to his office. Good fun. But it's that selling, isn't it? That's selling. So, but I did. I saw that as my future, and I'd eventually stayed in that industry, in the warranty industry. Aon acquired us a few years later, probably till I retired in 2002. So yeah.
Wrapping it up then, is there anything you look back on now and you think, I wish I'd done that, wish I'd gone there? There was that moment after the World Cup when Matt Busby rang Ron Greenwood at West Ham and they didn't tell you the phone call that came in, as opposed to when Stoke phoned up, they pulled you into the office and said, they're interested.
Yes, well the clubs had the power in those days. The first thing, Man United came in for me in just after the World Cup and offered about 200 grand, which would have been a record. The player doesn't get any notification of that. This all came out many years later, but the interesting part of the story was when they asked me, Ron Greenwood, first he said no, and then said something in the paper about, you can have Geoff providing we have Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law and George Best. And then I think the club went back again to Ron, and I think they were abroad somewhere. Ron just sent a telegram to Alex Ferguson. He said to Alex Ferguson, no, Greenwood. And that they actually showed the telegram many years later. It was no, Greenwood. Really? And then the time when the club wanted me to move on, I was 30 then, and I felt quite strongly I had another few years left, so I was slightly irritated and a bit hot-headed as a younger person.
To leave you on 499 games as well was a bit
yes, you're not bothered about records. I wasn't aware till many years later it was 499. I was irritated they wouldn't let me go. I'd signed for £20. They wanted 80,000 for me after 15 years. And so that I should have been cuter. We didn't have any advisors. I was hot-headed. I felt I had more to prove, and I did prove it. I went to Stoke for 3 years, played 100-odd games, got about 35 goals. So I proved that I could still play. But what I should have done with an advisor, as they do today, you stay at the club till your contract finishes and then walk away, and without getting a fee of 80 grand. But I think it was a different era. You were just happy to play. There wasn't a great deal of money in the game. You're not playing for the money. The England fee was £60 a match fee. So you're just in that era of the game where the money wasn't the be-all and end-all of it. You played because you loved it, because you wanted to be successful. And of course, that's obviously a significant.
I was going to say, last question then, or last point. Just tell everybody how much you actually earned as the bonus for lifting football's greatest prize, the players' pool. It was huge, wasn't it?
Well, the story about the bonus, as I talked about the team spirit, you're not talking money, or you hear the international teams falling out during the tournament about the money and the bonuses they shouldn't be on. The Dutch is a classic example. That was never the case. It wasn't until after we'd won the final, Alf Ramsey came and saw the group of players and said, the FA have awarded you £22,000. And the lads first thought, oh, that's great, 22 grand each. No, £22,000 to be shared between the 22 players. And he also said, it was interesting in terms of showing the spirit and camaraderie, he said that the FA wanted to give it to you pro rata to the number of games you played. So therefore, Moro played 6 of the games, would receive a bigger chunk than Norman Hunter, of course, his substitute, his number 2, didn't kick a ball in the tournament. But just to illustrate that team spirit and camaraderie, very quickly, within seconds, the senior players went, no, we don't want that. It's 22,000, 22 players, we don't want anything shared like that, we want £1,000 each. So that was the bonus, but what was the interesting point is the speed at which the senior players said, no, we don't want that. £60 match fee, and so we got £1,000 each. So that was the time. It was quite irritating many years later when you realise that they made 4 or 5 million out of the World Cup and paid a fortune in tax. And we'd heard the Germans who we talked to recently over the years that I think they've got for losing the final, they got about £10,000 each. So.
Yeah, but that's because they had Beckenbauer there. It was a right little rabble-rouser at the time. You didn't even get the ball either, did you? There was some cock and bull story about the fact that in Germany there's a tradition that the guy that scores the first goal gets the ball, as opposed to the guy that scored the hat-trick. And that went on for 30 years before you got the ball back, didn't it? Or 20 years. Heller.
It was 96, 30 years.
So it was 30 years, yeah.
30 years. Heller walked, the German number 8 who scored the first goal, walked up, stuck the ball up his jumper, and buggered off to Germany with it, and it was in his loft for 30 years. And then some of you may remember the story, there was a bit of a media war between the Sun and the Mirror, trying to bring the ball back in connection with the 96 Euros. And he brought it back. Then the Mirror won it, along with the Branson group came in, who stepped on the publicity surrounding that, and they paid him about 80 grand, I think, he had to bring the ball back. I was part of the story, there's a picture of me on the front page of the Mirror kissing the ball, welcoming it back. Never got it back. I sat in the dressing room after the game thinking, well, I've scored 3, it's still a tradition to get the ball. Thinking that the ball will turn up sooner or later, but it did, 30 years
And your shirt is up for auction again, isn't it? At Sotheby's.
It is, yes.
And I've seen that it fetched 80 grand on a previous auction, but I've seen that the estimate this time round is between £400,000 to £500,000.
That's right, yeah. all my stuff went to auction, including the shirt, 12, 13 years ago. I think that then it went, for the first time it went for about 90.
Right.
And then it's gone on subsequently to another purchaser of well-known memorabilia. It's been sold by the next or the next part. I'm not sure how many times it's changed hands. It's an important piece of memorabilia, like a classic card, which always goes up in value. So it is, as I've seen it reported, around the £400,000 markets, and they intend to sell it. The guy around, of course, the anniversary, the 50th anniversary in July. That's the master plan. But it's interesting because I'm not a football family. The family, we're just an ordinary group of people. I'm just the grandpa at home, and I once asked my three daughters what they wanted for my memorabilia. I didn't use the word memorabilia. I said what they want when I'm no longer around. This is going back 15, 20 years. And I'm thinking medals really, and cups and all the trophies, which I still had then. My oldest daughter Claire said, God rest her, that Dad, she said, that settee in the living room, she said, I just absolutely love that. Can I have that? So from then and a few other conversations with the family, I decided not to leave the medals in a bank and some of the other stuff in a black bin liners up in the loft, and decided to let it all go to various people who are interested in it and give the money to the children. And 12 years later, 13 years later, I don't regret that for 1 second. For me, it was I think, the right thing to do.
Geoff, it has been an absolute pleasure to sit in your company tonight. I mean, it's been amazing stories. It was an amazing time, and I don't know, let's hope we get something else to celebrate sometime soon, maybe in the next couple of weeks. Although Iceland, I mean, it's going to be tough, isn't it? Iceland.
Well, it's not going to be easy, as we've seen already in some of the early games. The fancy teams. Against some of the less fancy teams, the games have been quite close, as you'd expect in a major tournament. I think the difficulty is because of the draw now. This you can never say it's easy, but you think we should get through. But the latter part of the draw makes it a lot more difficult for us. So I think we need to see a bit more spark. I mean, they controlled the game. There's maybe a spark missing. You needed some kind of attitude. We saw with the Republic winning their game. That was quite heartwarming and really playing aggressively for the 90 minutes and thoroughly deserved to win the game. And we probably need to see a bit more of that kind of attitude alongside the quality we have, because it does take that kind of the balance of the skill and the temperament and the attitude that wins games, that wins tournaments. Skill alone, not enough. Attitude alone is not enough. It's just you've got to be a huge combination of both that's successful in games and in ultimately winning the tournaments.
Brilliant. Ladies and gentlemen, Sir Geoff Hurst.
Thank you.